If your company sells stock in an offering that isn't registered with the SEC, typically known as a private placement or a private offering, you need to file a Form 8K with the SEC within 4 business days. Today on Zippy Point. I'm Brock Romanek and I'm a big fan of use. Under Item 3.02 of Form 8K, a 8K is required to be filed if the company sells equity securities in an unregistered transaction. What to disclose? 4 things pulled from sub-items A through C and then sub-item E of Item 701 of Regulation SK. You see them here. 1, securities sold. 2, the consideration. 3, the exemption from registration that's claimed. And 4, the terms of any conversion or exercise. Notice that Item 302 skips over Item 701B, which is disclosure that is solicited about underwriters and other purchasers. So you're not required in these 8Ks to include that type of information. But if it's relevant and you don't include it, it needs to go in your next Form 10Q. So if you want to avoid that type of disclosure in your next 10Q, your next quarterly filing, include all the Item 701 information, including 701B information in this 8K. Let's talk trigger dates under Item 302A when the company enters into an agreement that's enforceable against it, under which the equity securities are to be sold. That's a trigger date. If there's no such agreement, the closing or settlement of the transaction, that will be the trigger date. Sometimes you might need Sometimes a company will need to file 2 8Ks if they don't know the number of shares at the signing when they're doing an acquisition. So if the number of shares aren't known at the time, the company discloses an estimate and then files an amendment or a new 8K at closing to disclose the exact number. Let's talk about the de minimis threshold in Item 302B. No 8K is required if the equities sold in the aggregate since the last 302 8K or since the last periodic report, whichever is most recent, is less than 1% of the class of equity securities sold. Instruction 1 to Item 302 has a denominator of these calculations. The number of shares outstanding refers to the actual number of shares of equity securities of the class outstanding and does not include outstanding securities convertible to or exchangeable for. You get it. The staff's position is that the computation of the 1% threshold begins on the end date of the quarterly or annual period, not the date on which the company filed its periodic report. Let's parse through some examples. Here's a straightforward Reg D offering. Here's one with a pair of stock purchase agreements. This example has a registered direct offering, but the placement agent got unregistered warrants. So that's what's disclosed in the Item 3.02 disclosure. And here's one for a Section 3A9 exchange. I thought I'd throw another exemption in there that's different than a Reg D or a Section 4.2. There are a number of Corp Fin staff interpretations under Item 3.02. This one indicates that an 8K is required if a 34 Act reporting subsidiary receives an equity investment from its 34 Act reporting parent. This one indicates that an 8K is triggered when a company enters into an agreement to issue unregistered equity securities to a third party if the volume threshold is surpassed. Here's one where the grant of employee stock options is not considered a sale or offer to sell under Section 2A3 of the 33 Act, and thus an 8K is not required. And then finally in this one, an 8K is triggered upon an unregistered sale of warrants, an unregistered sale of non-employee options, or an unregistered sale of convertible notes if the volume threshold is exceeded.